At the age of 83, Alexander Winspear had been through a lot in his life. He was a veteran of World War I, proudly serving his country. After the war, he worked as a machinist for Pontiac Motors. When he finally retired in 1962 to spend some time with his wife, it was short-lived after she passed away only 4 years later. If anyone had earned the right to die with dignity and grace, it was Alexander. But instead, he was murdered in 1987. Nearly 37 years later, police are still hunting for his killer. While they have a list of potential suspects, it may be up to the public to help them solve this crime. It was around 10 in the morning on October 27, 1987, when Walt Francisco pulled up to Alexander's home in Largo, Florida, to pick him up for breakfast. This was a routine that the two had maintained 7 days a week for almost 15 years. If it wasn't Walt, it was his wife or son who would come and pick Alexander up. But on this day, things were different. Usually when Walt pulled into the driveway, Alexander was already in the doorway waiting for him. But today he wasn't there. Walt honked the horn a few times and waited. Honked again, waited a few more minutes, but Alexander still didn't emerge. Walt finally got out of his car and went to the door, which he noticed was unlocked. He pushed it open and called out for Alexander, but he didn't hear anything back. It wasn't just that there wasn't a voice. The home was completely devoid of any of its normal noises. No fans whirring, no lights buzzing, the TV or radio wasn't on. Sensing something could be wrong, Walt went back to Alexander's bedroom to check on him. That's where he found Mr. Winspear on the bed. Walt checked him for a pulse, but couldn't detect one. He went to a neighbor's house. This was before cell phones, and it was a neighbor who was friendly with Mr. Winspear. They both ended up going back in and checking, realizing that the police needed to be called. That's when the Largo Police Department was contacted. Detective Adam Compton, with the Largo PD, is working on this case today. According to him, their department got the call at around 10:50 a.m. and arrived on the scene shortly after. It didn't take long for them to realize that Alexander hadn't died of natural causes. It became apparent that it was a crime scene. The scene was taped off as a crime scene. The Pinellas County Sheriff's Office Forensic Unit did the processing. To the integrity of the investigation, Detective Compton declined to describe the scene or acknowledge if a murder weapon was found at the location. But he confirmed that this was a violent death, which meant that the Largo PD had a dangerous killer on the loose. They were far from finding out who did it or why this happened. As they looked around Alexander's home, nothing was jumping out at them. They couldn't find any sign of forced entry. Alexander's home had 2 additional structures built around it: a little sunroom and a small kitchen and bathroom area. Alexander's primary living space was what looked like an Airstream camper, with the sunroom and kitchen bathroom area on either side. Both of those additional structures had doors to the outside, but there was no forced entry. Both doors were locked. That left only the unlocked door that Walt came through, making that the most likely entry point for the killer. But there was also no apparent sign of burglary. Alexander didn't have anything of significant value to take. Police found his wallet with cash still inside, though it's noted that the wallet was hidden. If this was a burglary or robbery attempt, the wallet may simply never have been discovered by the intruder. With little in the way of motive, police turned to canvassing the neighborhood for leads. 2 neighbors reported hearing a loud noise, both saying it occurred at 4 in the morning. One neighbor wasn't able to describe what the sound was. He described himself as a sound sleeper who was in deep sleep, and he said it was loud enough that it woke him. Another neighbor, part of a couple, heard a loud noise and described it as a banging of aluminum. It was noted that Mr. Winspear had an aluminum door. If that was Alexander's door neighbors heard, that could give police a potential timeline of when the murder occurred. That timeline was filled out more when they talked to Walt and his wife, Elma. They were essentially Alexander's caretakers and basically surrogate family. Alexander was a widower who had never had children with his wife. While Detective Compton is unaware of how the relationship came to be, Walt and his family were clearly important people in Alexander's life. They did everything for him, helped him pay his bills, cleaned the house, did laundry, mowed his lawn. Nobody knew Alexander's schedule better than Walt and Elma. They would pick him up around 10 o'clock every morning and take him to a restaurant in the city, south of his location, probably a couple miles away. He would have breakfast there, sit and read the newspaper, sleep in the chair, go out and walk around the plaza. Sometimes he would feed the dogs out there. He would come back, have lunch, and then get picked up around 4:30 that afternoon by Walt. They would go to a bar down the street and have 1 to 3 beers. They would leave there typically around 5:30 and have him home between 5:30 and 5:45, repeating this routine 7 days a week. On the day of Alexander's murder, this schedule was no different. Walt and Elma told police that they last saw Alexander between 5:30 and 6 p.m. when they dropped him off at home. Everything that day seemed normal. But there was something out of the ordinary that happened a little over a month prior. Alexander was burglarized. At first they thought it might have been the beginning of October, but Walt's wife believed it was the end of September. Regardless, it was very close to when the homicide happened, that sometime during the evening, Alexander reported his wallet and a flashlight were stolen. Alexander was known to flash his money around a bit. He had a pension from working at Pontiac and Social Security coming in, and he was wary of banks, didn't even have credit cards. This meant cash was king. Alexander would carry a bunch of smaller bills wadded up, making it look like he had a fat stack. Walt had warned him about making it known that he had money, worried someone would see him as an easy target. And they actually had. Alexander told Walt that he thought approximately $250 cash was in his wallet when it got stolen. Walt urged him to report this, but Alexander questioned what the police would do. He couldn't bring himself to report it. Walt even tried to go to the police department and report it for him, but obviously the victim has to report it, so it didn't get reported. Alexander was also fearful that if he did report it, the perpetrator might come back and hurt him. He only weighed about 100 pounds in those last few weeks of his life, so he wasn't physically capable of stopping an intruder or defending himself. He thought it was better to just let the whole thing go. For police, that meant it's possible that whoever successfully burglarized him in the first place could have come back for another attempt, this time with tragic consequences. Now it made sense to them why Alexander's wallet was found hidden away during their initial search of his home. He'd been burglarized once and wasn't going to let them find his wallet again. The autopsy was done on the 28th, the day after Alexander's body was found. But much like the crime scene, the Largo PD has been very tight-lipped regarding what was found, including his cause of death. Although Detective Compton confirmed that there was some kind of blunt force trauma, this aligns with reporting by Jane Meinhardt of the Tampa Bay Times, which stated that the autopsy found several bruises and a cut on his upper body and head. But no matter how Alexander was killed, police still didn't have a suspect. They continued to knock on doors and interview people in an old-school 1987 style. When they interviewed the owner of a restaurant that Alexander frequented, he gave them several taxi cab companies that they would sometimes call for him if he needed a ride. Usually it was Walt or Elma driving Alexander, but occasionally it wasn't. Unfortunately for investigators, the taxi cab information led them nowhere. They also interviewed bartenders and customers of the bar Alexander and Walt would go to, hoping someone there might put them on the right track. While everyone at the bar knew Alexander, none of them could recall him having an issue with anyone, or even speaking of any kind of enemies. Police then decided to turn to what little data they had access to back in the 80s, looking at the crime reports from Alexander's neighborhood. What they discovered when looking there shocked them. According to Detective Compton, the reports showed a clear pattern leading up to Alexander's murder. They pulled all the reports that were taken in that neighborhood. Looking at just October, there were 5 to 8 burglaries in the area where jewelry and money were stolen. Police turned back to the neighbors, and one of them mentioned a juvenile causing problems in the neighborhood. From there, police were able to find a larger group of juveniles who had been arrested for residential burglaries. Even more shocking than the number of burglaries happening in such a short period were the ages of some of the people committing them. A couple of them were 10 years old and had been arrested for burglaries as young as 8. Some of the suspects at the time were as old as 17 years old. There was another person of interest, someone in the area who associated with these young kids committing burglaries. He was 32 at the time. Most of them admitted to doing home burglaries at the time, but obviously everybody denied any involvement with Alexander's case. Even though they all denied involvement, at least one of them in the group, identified as Warren, did admit to knowing who Alexander was from the neighborhood. He also claimed that he liked him. But admitting knowledge of someone doesn't make one a murderer, and that ultimately left police with nothing. Even the physical evidence wasn't helping them narrow in on a suspect. They had taken bed sheets and clothing that the FBI crime lab processed in the very beginning, and there was nothing to break the case that came out of that. That basically put the case at a standstill for 7 years, until 1995, when one of the suspects from the original group, identified as Martin, agreed to take a polygraph test. But when he took it, he showed no deception. Then, in October of 1997, police got Warren to agree to one. He was interviewed when he was being charged with something else at the time and was in custody. Detective Shaw went to interview him while he was in custody, in reference to this homicide. At first, he said that he was cooperative, but then asked for an attorney. So the polygraph never happened. While this turned out to be another disappointment for police, Warren did give them something. He told police that he believed someone identified as Neil Barnes was involved in the homicide. This name wasn't new to police. He was part of that original group that police had been looking at in 1987. He was one of 2 Barnes brothers. The others identified as Ryan. But again, this was just members of this group pointing fingers at one another, not offering up any proof that police could actually use to make an arrest. So the trail went cold again. But as technology improved over the years, Largo PD continued to submit things for testing. In October of 2002, they finally got a hit when a print found inside the sunroom of Alexander's home was run through AFIS. This was not a bloody fingerprint, just a regular print found on the sunroom door that was locked the morning that the body was discovered. The owner of this print happened to be Walt's stepson. Walt's stepson at the time of the murder in 1987 was 15 years old and had no criminal record. But in the years since, he had gotten into trouble. Nothing violent, but issues with drugs and burglary, which is why his prints were in AFIS in 2002. Police interviewed the stepson in December. He admitted to being at Alexander's home 3 or 4 times to help him cut his grass. He said he'd never gone inside the residence, but had been to the doorstep to help Alexander inside. That's possibly where his print came from on the door. Police noted that the stepson didn't appear nervous at all. When police interviewed Walt, he confirmed his stepson's story, that he had helped mow the lawn. Walt also added that they had been inside to use the bathroom while there. There wasn't anything to dispute what Walt and his stepson were saying. There was no other evidence that pointed toward the stepson being the murderer. Walt and his family were like family to Alexander, making any of them unlikely suspects. Looking back on the case now, Detective Compton says there's nothing in the file that indicates Walt, or his wife, or the stepson were ever suspects. Throughout the mid-2000s, police continued to send things out for testing, with nothing coming of it. This included nail scrapings taken from Alexander that showed no foreign DNA. While the forensic evidence continued to come up short, police tried every way they could to solve this case. They even turned to the school system, since most of their suspects were juveniles. They were looking at school records, mainly looking for absentees during a certain period. But unfortunately, the school system didn't keep those records, and by the time that was looked at, they didn't have records of any absentees. With nowhere left to turn, they went back to the start. Between 2004 and 2005, the Largo PD started to re-interview many of the original suspects, most of whom were now in prison for other crimes. In October of 2004, Warren again denied involvement. Like they'd heard before, he pointed to one of the Barnes brothers being capable of the murder. Then in November, police interviewed someone who was not part of the original group, but had information. This person heard through the neighborhood that it was a robbery gone wrong, and that Alexander was hit in the head with a baseball bat. Of course, by the time he was sharing this information, he said he couldn't remember who told him that. But it wasn't long before police were able to get some confirmation on this information. This time, it came directly from one of the suspects inside that original group. In December, an original suspect, identified as Jeff, was interviewed by police. He gave information about the way he had heard the old man had been killed, and information about the motive. Specifically, Jeff heard Alexander was beaten with a lamp, a pipe, or a baseball bat. He said the motivation for the robbery was Alexander's wallet. Jeff was interviewed again only a few months later. When asked about the Barnes brothers and Martin, he indicated to police that they were on the right track. But when one of the brothers, Ryan Barnes, was interviewed, he told them that he thinks Jeff was involved. When they interviewed Ryan's brother, Neil Barnes, he wouldn't even talk to them. He requested a lawyer. While police appeared to be getting a little more information than they had before, they still weren't getting what they needed. There were all the so-called rumors or speculation during the interviews. These three guys might be involved, or these three, or these two. It always kind of revolved around this group of people. But what of this information, if any, was helpful? Police seem to have difficulty figuring it out. That's the challenge. What is reliable? What's not reliable? There had been a permutation of a lot of these people together, not together. This one pointed at that one. According to Jonathan Abel in the Tampa Bay Times, over 6 years, police had interviewed over 60 people, many of them multiple times. Between 2009 and 2012, several things happened. Another round of re-interviews yielded nothing substantial. Then testing on Alexander's shirt revealed that the left armpit contained a mixture of his DNA and the DNA of 2 other individuals. Police were able to get buccal swabs from Martin, Warren, and Walt's stepson. When asked if they were able to obtain samples from anyone else, specifically the Barnes brothers who keep coming up, Detective Compton said that one of the Barnes brothers also had a buccal swab taken, and that for the other people, DNA profiles were already available because of prior arrests, so there was no need to go out and get those. But when all the results came back, they didn't lead police anywhere. No determination could be made regarding the possible DNA mixture. The DNA mixture was so limited that it wasn't eligible to be put into CODIS. Fast forward to 2017, they tried to go at the forensic evidence again. Detective Frail in 2017 went through all the evidence again, seeing if there was anything else that could be done, and there was really nothing that could be done. She actually sent off another item that hadn't been tested for DNA. There were actually 2 items, a pillowcase and a flashlight, that were sent off to the forensic lab in June of 2017. Those results came back in September, and regarding DNA on the flashlight, they ruled out all the suspects discussed, including Walt's stepson, who was never a suspect. The pillowcase had insufficient DNA for inclusion or exclusion. According to Detective Compton, there hasn't been a large enough DNA profile on any of the items to enter into CODIS. There was one last shot taken in 2019 when a piece of hair that was found on Alexander was sent off to be tested, but it was eventually determined to be his hair. Still, credit must be given to the Largo PD, because more often than not, these cases fall by the wayside over the years. But every few years, they were re-looking, re-interviewing, and retesting evidence. But sometimes the desired results don't come no matter what is done. As time goes by, there are fewer people to talk to and fewer things to follow up on. At this point, police haven't had any success with the physical evidence. Whether it was evidence sent to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, or the Pinellas County Forensic Lab, or even early on to the FBI, nothing has pointed them to a suspect, leaving this case where it stands right now, unsolved. But Detective Compton is hopeful that it doesn't have to stay that way. He believes someone out there could hold the key to solving Alexander's case. Really, what we're relying on right now is someone coming forward with some legitimate information or knowing something. We're hoping that it will trigger someone's memory, or just a conversation somebody had. We would love to talk to somebody that might have some knowledge of the case, or someone made an admittance, and go from there. We'll continue to look as technology changes with DNA, but I believe that's the way that's going to solve the case. Somebody obviously knows what happened. All Detective Compton can do now is continue to work the case, hoping that the day will come when he can finally close it for good. Because Alexander and those who knew him deserve that. According to Detective Compton, Alexander deserves much more. Mr. Winspear deserves justice. A U.S. veteran, war veteran. It appears by all measures he's lived a very good life. A hard-working man, had his pension. Everybody we talked to said he was a fine man, didn't have any enemies. He deserves his justice. Just because it's been 36 years doesn't mean that he still doesn't deserve justice. The case of Alexander Winspear remains one of the most persistent cold cases in Largo, Florida. Despite decades of investigation, multiple re-examinations of evidence, and advances in forensic technology, the 93-year-old veteran's killer remains at large. The investigation has evolved from its initial focus on a group of juvenile burglars to a more comprehensive examination of all possibilities. Yet crucial questions remain unanswered. What makes this case particularly challenging is the passage of time. Many of the original suspects are now deceased or serving time for other crimes. and potential witnesses have scattered across the country. The physical evidence, while preserved and repeatedly tested with improving technology, has yet to yield the breakthrough that investigators hope for. Detective Compton's dedication to the case reflects the commitment of the Largo Police Department to seek justice for Alexander Winspear, the elderly veteran who survived World War I and worked his entire life as a machinist, deserved to live out his final years in peace. Instead, he became the victim of a violent crime that has haunted his community and law enforcement for nearly 4 decades. The investigation serves as a testament to both the challenges of solving cold cases and the persistence of dedicated law enforcement officers who refuse to let these crimes fade into obscurity. While Alexander's killer may believe they have escaped justice, Detective Compton's words ring true. Somebody knows what happened that October morning in 1987. And it may take just one person coming forward to finally bring closure to this long-standing mystery. Until that day comes, Alexander Winspear's case remains open, a reminder that justice delayed is not necessarily justice denied, and that the pursuit of truth continues regardless of how much time has passed.